You're good to go.
Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. Today is Monday, April 8th, and welcome to the Policy Committee subcommittee meeting. Today we have a special guest with Jessica to discuss some of our policies. So with that being said, well, you know what? I didn't pull up my agenda. Please forgive me. I was reading all of my articles instead. With that being said, I think the first order of business is to pass the minutes from last month's meeting. So has everyone had an opportunity to take a look over the meeting minutes from the March 5th meeting?
I did.
All right. Can I have a motion to pass? I took a look at them. They looked fine.
Motion to approve the minutes of our most recent meeting.
Excellent. Do I have a second?
Second.
Excellent. So minutes approved, and moving on, I believe our first order of business is the residency policy. So Jessica, that's why you're here. And Lisa, I know that you have been speaking a lot with, I believe, Michael about residency issues, and that's one of the reasons why we have Jessica here. So would you like to lead this policy in particular?
Sure. I think we already looked at part of this policy in this committee. So it's policy 5111111, which is admission and placement. And if you go and you look at I think the part at the end about kindergarten and placement and all of that, we kind of have sorted out that, with the September 1st. I know that that there may still be some questions about admission and placement for future residents. And so we have all of the details here of the future residents A, then we have B, which has been eliminated, and then C, unforeseen circumstances and renovations, which I think is where some of the questions might be. So Michael, I think I'd turn it over to you where you think it would be helpful to get some more clarity on.
Yeah, first off, thank you, Lisa. Lisa spent a bunch of time walking me through this policy. And Jessica, I want to thank you for joining as well, because
Sure.
I think without you, us just sort of ruminating back and forth as to whether or not something could or should be done, I think probably goes nowhere without you. So appreciate a few minutes of your time here. Basically, look, I would have thought nothing of the policy. I read through it. I didn't necessarily see anything that I would have called out, with the exception of the fact that there was a recent situation that happened here in town. And of course, as we evaluate a lot of these policies, I think Steve mentioned this, of course, doing this every so often, I thought we should policy with the edge case. And the edge case in this circumstance is a family in town had their house burned down to the ground, essentially. Now, the house, they've been a resident since, I have my notes here, since late 2020. They were ready to enroll their son in kindergarten for the 24-25 school year. Their house burned down last February, so February of 23, burned down to the studs. They are voters, taxpayers, etc. When the house burned down, of course, they had to rent. They were forced to move and rent, and they rented basically like 500 feet, but over the border in Westport. And so the question was, of course, with respect to this section, it talks about, an estimated date of completion no later than 12 months from the date of having been displaced. Well, in reading that, of course, if your house burns down, you have to engage an architect, you have to engage, a contractor. Of course, it takes longer than 12 months. The expected date for this house to be rebuilt and for them to move in is June of 25. So that's a little over 2 years from the original date of the house burning down. Okay, so remember, the house burned down February of 23. The expected move-in date is June of 25. So the question really is, and I'm sympathetic to Lisa in this because we've had a lot of discussions, is should there be more room to accommodate? Should we have language in here to accommodate an extreme circumstance like this, where the house burns down to the ground, they're looking to enroll their child, but of course it's going to take longer than 12 months. And so then they're potentially subject to tuition payments. And what we're trying to strike here, I think, is the balance between helping out and not adding stress to, let's say, a fellow Weston, a Weston resident, while at the same time balancing that with not opening up the town to specious sort of, claims for certain individuals. And Lisa and I have talked about this, as have happened in the past. So that's the background as to why I think we should just talk about it and just make a decision and move on. I don't know if there's any room here or if we should make any changes, but that's what you're here for, Jessica.
Yeah, well, Michael, I think I have good news for you, which is that what you're talking about is actually already in your policy. And Lisa and I have talked about this. So if you look at C1, it says in the last sentence,
extraordinary circumstances, that right. Part. Yeah.
Yep. And it does give the superintendent sole discretion to make that decision, right? And so part of the I think the beauty actually of this language is that it uses the word extraordinary without specifying what constitutes an extraordinary circumstance. But extraordinary is a very extreme word, right? It's extraordinary, something out of the ordinary. I'm a little hesitant to talk about specific circumstances. I understand you're pointing to a specific circumstance, but for a number of reasons, I want to just make my comments general. But I will say, including FERPA, but I will say, actually, they're not a student yet. But I will say just generally that what you're describing, a long-term, Weston family whose house burnt down, and that does count, I think, as a natural disaster. I think that could constitute an extraordinary circumstance. I think some of the factors to think about, or that the superintendent might want to think about to make sure that this provision isn't being abused, is, well, could the family have rented in Weston, or is the rental stock so limited that they really couldn't have, given the size of their family and the family's needs? Number one. I understand we live in a really tight rental and housing market right now, so circumstances can take into account what's going on in the market, right? Number two, the other question I think that might come up is, well, does it really need to take 2 years? Maybe it would take 3 years if somebody's building a 10,000 square foot house. And is it really fair to burden the taxpayers of Weston with accommodating children who are not residing in the town for 3 years because the family is building such an enormous home, right, that it can't actually be rebuilt in 2 or 3 years? Again, I'm not talking about specific circumstances, but these are the types of questions that might come up. I also think of equal protection issues. So, if a family is going to rebuild and it's going to take 15 months, where do we draw the line? Is it the amount of time we're thinking about? Is it the nature of the rental market at the time? Is it how long they've been a Weston resident before the natural disaster hit? Is it our belief that they'll actually be able to fulfill a tuition agreement that says if they're not able to move in within the time specified, that they'll be on the hook for tuition? There are a lot of factors that go into this. But long story short, Michael, there is this provision already in there.
Okay, so I wanted to get away from the specific issue as well. I mean, this is the edge case that forces the conversation, not necessarily. I don't want to look at this as a case for this individual or this family specifically, but just going forward, I just want to make sure that the language that we have in here and the extraordinary language that you reference, that you believe that fully accommodates sort of, situations like this where Lisa has, I think, some wiggle room in order to establish some sort of policy that, again, provides her with flexibility, yet doesn't open us up to, every claim known to man in terms of, potential residents moving in and, buying land and having no intention, let's say, of having full residency here, sort of in town. So
I do. I think you have the language in there. I think the key is going to be how it's implemented.
Right.
And it really needs to be implemented consistently and judiciously. I think it's appropriate to give the superintendent that discretion rather than the board, because the board really can't and shouldn't be privy to every circumstance that comes up, for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that the board might be the ultimate arbiter of a residency case, and so can't really have been involved at the lower level. If you look down at paragraph 3 references paragraph 1 and says, if the student doesn't become a legal resident within 12 months from the date of displacement or such longer period as may be permitted by the superintendent as stated in paragraph 1.
Right.
So, so I do think that language really does do what you were hoping it would do, Michael.
And my last question on this, I'm not going to be a dead horse here. My question just for clarification. So for the 12-month period, Jessica, of course, that 12-month period then would capture probably the majority of cases, right? Frankly. But of course, it does also increase the number of cases by which we would have to kick it back to Lisa for an extraordinary sort of circumstance. Do we feel that the 12-month time frame is an appropriate time frame? Meaning the more you extend that, the fewer circumstances become that the fewer extraordinary circumstances that Lisa has to weigh in on, and more so it's more of a standard sort of policy, right? So to catch more cases. So I'll kick that to you. Just do we feel okay with the 12 months? Is that consistent with other school districts? Should we, look at that and look to amend it? Totally open to what your interpretation of that would be.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And I think your question really is getting at the question of how do it would be nice to limit the opportunity for there to be a unequal application of this extraordinary circumstance provision. And every time that question gets posed to Lisa, it requires her to think, okay, what have we done in the past? What are the implications for the future? So I think it's a fair and appropriate question. That being said, I think that 12 months is an appropriate period of time for the average house that's being rebuilt. It really depends on what the circumstances are, and that's where the extraordinary circumstances piece comes in. But I know a couple years ago during COVID, the availability of building materials and builders and labor was limited. So maybe things were taking longer because of that. But do we really want to get into, I think if we really wanted to answer your question, particularly and specifically, we'd probably go out and do some research on how long an average house takes to build. And when I say an average house, I mean, what's the average house in Weston? How long does it take to build? I don't know the answer to that, but maybe you want to tie that period of time to that answer.
Yeah, look, I don't want to create an extraordinary amount of work here. Like I said, I'm trying to just evaluate the policy with an edge case, right? Fair enough, to make sure that the policy going forward we're comfortable with, and that the majority of cases, which I think they still would in the 12 months, the majority of cases are captured within sort of the standard policy, so as to limit Lisa's sort of having to apply an extraordinary process to a greater number of cases that may open her up, right, for looking at a case and not being accused of not applying standard objective a standard objective to anyone's edge case, for example. So that I'm trying to just strike the balance. But yeah.
I'll just say one more thing. I think that another concern I have about extending this period is that when sometimes people look at policies to help guide their behavior.
Yeah.
So if somebody looks at the policy and says, oh, I see I have 20 months. I see I have 15 months. Might that incentivize them to let things linger a little longer? And then the impact of that on the Weston Public Schools would be you would be accommodating students free of charge who are not even living in Weston, and perhaps more students.
Right.
So I think the key is we want to incentivize the most efficient response to this type of circumstance, not the least efficient. Number one. Number two, nothing about this policy says that you would kick a student out of the Weston Public Schools. It simply says that if they're not residing in Weston after that 12-month period, they have to pay tuition until they move in. And I think that's frankly, and I defer to all of you because this is really your discussion to have, but in light of what I see in residency policies, I do think that strikes a fair balance between fulfilling your fiduciary duty to the taxpayers of Weston, and also making sure that you're not kicking families out who have been long-term Weston residents and have fallen on hard times for one reason or another.
Okay, look, I think that's fair. I appreciate you joining. I just wanted to get your input and just make sure that everyone here was comfortable with this as it stands now. And if we are, then that's great and we can move on. But it was striking, while the iron was hot here, and just wanted to make sure that we fully discussed this while it came up before the committee. So.
Well, and I appreciate that. I think it is important to review and clarify and make sure that people feel comfortable with this. One thing I want to point out is that we did pass a motion that any residency issues and expulsion issues would be heard by a hearing officer.
Yeah.
Which, is another thing that I think is good, because it makes it, it's very hard if a person is your neighbor, right next door to you, and something like this happens. I guess, you can abstain from it, but or recuse yourself, whatever the word is. But I think I'm comfortable with that. That's something we do every year. We got to put that in our tickler file to make sure we do it again this upcoming year, because both of those issues are tricky.
I agree. I also think that when I read through the policy, I wasn't aware of the time frame, what the time frame was, and I do think that 12 months. It's Michael, to your point, that's tight for a house, from the ground up. I think that they're depending upon whether they're changing the footprint, the foundation, things like that. That's tight for the house. But I also agree with what Jessica says. This gives them a little bit of incentive to say, listen, guys, we got to move on this, because this is going to cost us X number of dollars each month that you guys go beyond this date, kind of thing. And it does kind of keep your contractors honest. Let's put it that way. And Lisa, my question to you is, if we do maintain the 12 months, which I support personally, have you had an extraordinary amount of circumstances come to you in this policy, or are you comfortable with 12 months?
I'm comfortable. I think since my tenure in this seat, Jody, you can refresh my recollection. I think I've maybe had 4 issues of that involve construction. I've had other issues involving other documentation.
Not that many of them.
And just so you know, I am committed to doing due diligence. I actually go to the site. I try to do an overall thing to really get a sense and see what is fair here. Look at past practice, all of that stuff.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like we're all in agreement then that 12 months is probably a good time frame, and we'll just take it from there. And I really hope that this family is able to get their house. Gosh, that's a long time, 2.5 years to be out of your house.
Look, I'll say that I know someone in town who just had the kitchen redone. Took 6 months.
You got the wrong contractor. I hate to say it. My husband and I we're finishing on Monday, flipping an entire house, 4 bathrooms, 5 bedrooms, an entire kitchen, exterior, interior, new roof.
How long?
6 months.
6 months?
We bought it mid-October, and we will be staging it on Monday. So, and we do the majority of the work.
That's fast.
I'm not covered in paint, luckily today, but I have to go wallpaper after this. So, yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, I'm good. Thanks, Jessica. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jessica.
All right.
Great.
Take
Thanks,
care,
Jessica.
everybody. Enjoy
Take
the
care.
eclipse.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too. Be careful. All right. Moving on. I think.
Yeah, I think we're good with the rest of that policy. So let's, we can bring it to the board. The other
Well, hold
thing
on.
is
There
the
has-
kindergarten, right?
Oh
Okay.
yeah. There was a change. You're right. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Oh, now our favorite, artificial intelligence.
I have to tell you, reading over the artificial intelligence policy, I saw all kinds of great things in there, and it was struck out. So this is a very simple policy, and I want to ask why all these bullets were removed, and why we wanted to make it, because it seems like it's just a very broad policy with no teeth now. And I'm asking if that's on purpose or what the thought process is.
Sure. So I'll give some context first. So as those of you that may not know, CABE provides districts with model policies. CABE provided districts with a model policy, which is what you see in black. And we did create internally a district advisory, AI advisory committee, where we reviewed the CABE language first, and then we talked internally about what are some of our practices that we would like to see when we are adopting AI tools, not only for students, but for teachers as well. And also using this as an opportunity to define what different kinds of generative AI include. So the first part of the policy aspect of it, you'll see we've added some additional language that CABE was too general around, specifically relating to tools of AI that are specifically for teachers and students. Because as we know, every day we seem to have new tools that are being published or available, and it's taking us a considerable amount of time to ensure that we're not just saying, yeah, it's a free-for-all, that we want to make sure that the tools are quality and that they're actually being used with alignment to curriculum, and that we're all on the same page with it's a value added and it's not a replacement for teacher expertise and teacher knowledge. So the first part, the policy aspect of it does refer to the purpose of the policy, some definitions regarding generative AI, and the delineation between tools that are for teachers and for students, because they do follow different rules, I would say, when we want to adopt tools for teachers and students. For example, the district needs to still ensure that if we're, just like software, any software in general, that if a district is adopting an AI tool for students, it still follows the student privacy agreement laws, so that no companies are selling information or accessing student privacy information. So that's outlined here as well. We also wanted to make sure that we are highlighting the aspects of instruction and learning that relate to this AI tool, on why we're adopting it, and making sure that the tools that we bring in are to enhance curriculum, and they are aligned to our philosophy of curriculum design and our philosophy of universal design for learning. So we're looking at access and rigor. So that's the first page. You'll see that the red is what we've added, and we've also wrapped in, as we've talked in the past, of how this policy links to other policies. You'll see that this policy is linked to our student privacy policy, our computer usage and technology policy. This is linked to academic integrity. It's linked to equipment, books, and materials, which we reviewed last time, which includes software review and software adoption. And then because some of these tools are used for, teacher-specific use, we also wove in policies related to personnel and, teacher responsibility around efficacy, and also teacher use as well. Going into the regulations. So the regulations is how we're going to make decisions around the different tools that we're using. And frankly, the reason CABE provided almost like, it was an interesting model policy, I'll be very honest with you, because I don't necessarily think they understand it fully either. That the bullet items that they provided we're more about like guiding reflective questions that, you know, people that a AI advisory committee would use when they're making decisions, when they're adopting tools. So that's part of an internal process that we are designing and updating regularly. So when you think about administrative policy and regulations, again, you're right. The regulations are, how are we using our advisory committee to make decisions around the identification of the policy. So you'll see that when we outline the guidelines for adopting AI tools for students, there are some real big ticket items that we expect the internal advisory committee to reflect on when they're making those decisions. And you're right, it is broad, right? Because it's our job internally to make sure that we ask ourselves those reflective questions. It wouldn't fit within a policy and regulations. What does fit is that the tool complies with the state student privacy laws, that it meets the criteria that we set within our internal process, and that it supports the definition of the policies that we've outlined above.
Yeah, Sharon, when I read this, I had that same thought initially, and it feels like, and Tina, I think it just feels like this is establishing just a general overall framework for how we're going to think about this, and actually we're going to kick a lot of this in terms of setting the individual sort of guidelines and points and the recommendations. We're going to kick that to the advisory committee, it sounds like. And so I guess a couple questions just really quickly on that. Has that advisory committee been formed yet? Okay, so it has been.
Yeah, this committee, just full disclosure, this committee, which includes our IT department. Sorry, hold on. I just lost my earbud. The IT department, K-12 representatives from teachers that are actually been piloting some of our AI tools for students that specifically at the middle school and the high school, and our library media specialists, K-12, which will be supporting a lot of the review and the training and the support of student and teacher tools throughout this process. So they put all of the entire team put their hands on this policy before it came to you.
Who do we have?
Very lengthy discussion. Yep.
Sorry to interrupt, but who on the administrative side do we have on this advisory committee? Is
So
it Dan?
Me, Dan,
Okay.
and then we have two assistant principals. So one representing K-5 and one representing 612. We have IT department representatives, one of which has been training with our library media specialist, our teacher. So he's been involved. We have a teacher was kind of the lead in piloting one of our AI tools at the middle school level for students. And then we have, as I mentioned, the library media specialist, K-12, all four of them.
Yep. Okay. No, I wanted to make sure we had someone from the administrative staff on there, in addition to teachers, obviously.
Yep.
And the rest. Okay.
For sure. We've also reviewed this with our principals and our full administrative team prior to coming to you. And I think, one of the balances, right, with writing policies and regulations is making sure that if we make a tweak to our internal review process when making decisions like this, because information evolves or we're learning as we go, we don't necessarily always want to have to come back to policy to update the policy, right? We want the work to keep moving forward so that, our teachers, our experts in the field have more autonomy to make some of those decisions as we move along. So establishing that internal review process and establishing the AI advisory committee is how we're going to implement the policy and keep the work moving forward. Because literally, I think there were 2 tools in the repository of access on the student policy side that Dan had. And by the time the advisory committee was established, I think there were 10 within the matter of a couple weeks.
Well, that's the whole thing. This is really quickly evolving. And so my thoughts are, I agree that it's not a bad idea to keep the policy relatively open so that there's room. But how then do we make sure that the advisory committee, what sort of guidelines are the advisory committee working under? That's a question, I guess, to make
Yeah,
sure that,
that's our job, right? That's our job as
Right.
administrators and as, leaders in the field to ensure that we are supporting that advisory committee and making those decisions and making sure those questions, which we are taking these, like CABE's questions, reflective questions that we struck out, we moved them to more of an internal review process. Like, these are good questions that we should be asking ourselves, but in an internal review process, it doesn't fit here.
okay, all right. Is it
Right.
possible, is there a mission statement for this advisory committee or something along those lines that maybe you could share with us? Or is it pretty much just, let's get everybody together in the room and talk about these things?
Yeah, I think that's great. That's our work moving forward. Right
Okay.
now, we just got to this point where we finally had a CABE policy. I think Weston's actually been a leader in this work, and we've actually had people in Durg A reach out to us and ask, like, what are you doing? And I've shared it with them already. And now a lot of the other districts are saying, well, let's all get together and see what you're doing and what you're doing. And maybe we can write a joint policy and a joint internal review process together. So that's kind of in the next phase of this work too. But we didn't want to wait.
I think that's a great idea. I think you're definitely to be commended for moving forward and hopping on this. But like you said, it's moving at breakneck speed, right? So
Yeah.
from one policy to 10 within a couple of weeks. I just think that, one of the reasons why this topic has been brought up at the board level is because there's obviously a lot of concern from the community about how artificial intelligence is being utilized in the classroom and how it's being utilized by students in the school. And to have a broad policy is great, but I think that people are going to be like a little like, well, that sounds really kind of broad. If there's any way that we can get some sort of, like I said, mission statement, guidelines for the group, what the group think is kind of like, this is our, this is how we're approaching AI, that we could put in, add into, like, maybe as a footnote on the policy, so it's not actually voted on policy, but so that it's available for people to see how AI is actually being approached from how it's being handled internally. I think that might be something that would be beneficial for the community to see.
I agree. I think too, it's important to make sure that we recognize we're going to be using a lot of the language in the policy portion of this, because we do talk about the purpose of AI, how it links to some of our current policies regarding software, because this is software, right? It's how we use the software with integrity and how we use the software in a way that connects to our instructional program, our curriculum, and enhances the learning experience, right? So we spent a considerable amount of time on that policy portion and added a lot more to it, believe it or not. And then I think there's going to be a lot more work that needs to be done, but we didn't want to wait for some of that to prohibit our work moving forward. We've already started piloting and using some tools with students and staff. But again, I don't want to use the word control, but at the same time, we don't want to be in a situation where just because it's available, we just want to say, yes, it's a free for all, because they're not all good tools, because everyone's jumping on the AI bandwagon. This is what happened during COVID. Really.
I think that understanding that there are guidelines and protections in place too with AI as far as the student is concerned is probably something that most parents are concerned about.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think the safeguard with the Connecticut law is going to help that. Sorry, Lisa.
Good.
No, it's okay. What I would suggest is I would recommend that we move the policy forward as is, and then give the committee some time to, kind of like what we did with the instructional materials policy. That worked very well with the review of the team and certain guidelines and everything. They can certainly work to develop all that. And we can revisit it in the fall to share what the work is. I would encourage us to put it on a Board of Ed agenda, because there are certain hot topics, if you will, and this is definitely one of them. But at least we've started down the road of providing clarification and providing the structure by which a team will effectively design this. But I have a feeling that this is the kind of policy that, based on how it plays out, needs to be reviewed every year or two. This isn't something that can sit and, back in 2024, and it's, well, I'll be
I think every year at
in
minimum, to be honest with
2040,
you.
we're still looking at it. So I think that that's sort of our commitment to you, if you will, moving forward with this.
Yeah, I'm visualizing this one as being probably revisited every year. So, all right. So I'm fine with moving this to the regular board if everyone else is. Yep.
Yep.
Michael?
Yeah.
Good? All right.
Yep.
All right. Excellent. Moving on. School tours. I read this. I was like, school tours? What are school? Like showing people around the school?
Yeah.
And then I kind of got it.
I was more impressed that it was on yellow paper from
Yeah, right. Yeah. So,
91.
An old school hand
You know,
typed out.
I have to tell you, this was the year, this month, March 91, when we took the kids to Spain. I wonder if this was a result on the trip. I still remember the kids, some of whom live in this town as adults, that went on that trip.
well, and to that point, Lisa, I really don't remember how we stumbled across this policy, but I did stumble across it. I can't remember, in the numerous times that we look at all the different policy numbers and kind of look for the blue and the yellow paper. This one we came across because last year we did a huge overhaul of field trips, both international field trips and in national field trips, I guess, in the country field trips. Can't remember the language off the top of my head. Because of that policy update and the regulations, the detail of the regulations now, this the language and or the process around educational tours, because this is really around field trips, is no longer applicable because we have a more current, updated and internal, external process for vetting and reviewing field trips, both international and local, that this doesn't really apply anymore.
The only thing was on that vetting process, because I was on the committee when we looked at that. I don't recall anything about insurance in there. Was that part of it?
Yes,
Maybe
it's in there.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right. If
Oh, yeah.
that's in there,
There's a huge thing on insurance. We took all of the shipment policies and forms when it comes to liability and insurance as well, and health forms too. Those are all part of the field trip policies now.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we're letting this one go out to pasture,
Yeah, it
correct?
can be sunset. Exactly.
All right. All right. I'm fine with that. I mean, considering I remember doing a lot of work on that field trip, or a lot of review on the field trip. Tina, you did the work. So,
Yeah.
So I'm fine with sunsetting this policy if everyone else is.
No, it's fine with me.
You don't want to argue about anything and go back and forth on sunsetting this one?
No.
Me either.
I
I
feel
did wanna
kind of sad thinking about it. That was a great trip we went on in March of 1991.
Aw. Where'd you guys go in Spain?
Madrid, Sevilla, Cordoba, Malaga.
Nice.
Granada.
I was just in Madrid a week and a half ago. It was so nice.
I know you're always going to Spain. I want to get in on one of these trips to see your.
But you have to go play grandma for a while too, which is actually kind of my favorite part of it. So,
I understand that.
Anyway, all right. So I think that we are good. Is there anything else that no, never mind. Can't bring anything else up. All right. I think the next meeting is May 7th on the schedule. If there's anything else that I need to hear about or we need to hear about with any of these policies. Otherwise, if I can have a motion to adjourn, I'll take one of those.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. Second.
Second.
Excellent. Hold on, Lisa, you're raising your finger. Did you have
I
something?
just wondered if you and Mike could stay on for a minute.
Sure.
Thank
All right.
you.
Excellent. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. See you on May 7th.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good break. Or see you
Thanks.
tonight.
Yeah, be careful looking at the sun. Yeah, see you tonight.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Lisa, do you want